It's live.
Yeah, live and recording.
I don't think it can be any more awkward than when you're sitting at a bookstore waiting and there's like 5 people in the audience and you're trying to decide if you should start.
That
That's
is
bad.
a good point. That's a good point. That is pretty awkward.
Yeah.
All right. I'm seeing that people are filtering in. Our numbers are still growing. So everyone get comfortable. Make sure you have tea.
I had an event in Boston with Claire Legrand, and like nobody came except my agent. And I was like, no, it gets worse than no one. You're witnessing my shame. It was awful.
Listen,
So nice
it
that he
happens.
came.
It happens. And like people from all over the levels of like fame and notoriety will get strangely small turnouts sometimes. It just
Publishing will keep you humble. That's for sure.
it just is like that. And I don't know why. All right. So hello, everybody. Before we get too chatty over here, welcome to our little virtual event space. My name is Allie. I will be making sure the cogs keep turning around here. I'm just going to do some really quick housekeeping before we get to the good stuff. So welcome. I am so excited to be introducing Joy McCullough and Elana K. Arnold here to discuss Joy's new novel, We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire, which has such a beautiful cover that you can see over here, and there it is. so pretty. So pretty. I'm a sucker for a good book cover. So before we get into the fun stuff, I just want to thank everyone here so much for tuning in and for buying books. Your guys' support really is what keeps us running, and we really love what we do. So if you guys also love what we do, come in, grab copies, or of course, head over online. I will be linking books in the chat, so it'll be really easy to find them. Shipping, we do ship if you're not local, so shipping is like $3.50 for the first book and then $1 on top of that. And I believe that books will be getting signed tomorrow. So if you have already ordered a book and it has not arrived yet, that's probably because we're waiting to sign it. And if you order today, those books will arrive signed. So head on over. I'll post the link. Let's see. While you are over on the website, I definitely recommend checking out some of our other upcoming events. We've got a really exciting roster coming up. And of course, sign up for the newsletter. It's just a once a week email that'll sort of let you know all of the fun, exciting community stuff that's going on in and around the bookstore. It'll have the reminders for everyone who's coming through, and of course, book clubs, which are sort of running in the Zoomosphere. Exciting new releases, signed copies that we have around, etc. And of course, if that is not for you, come check out all of our social media. We are at Third Place Books pretty much everywhere. We even have a TikTok, and we do some fun stuff around there. So go check it out, see if there's anything that sparks your interest. So we are here for about an hour, and towards the end, we will definitely be taking questions. And I am seeing that you guys have already discovered the chat and the Q&A, which is so wonderful and exactly what I was hoping to see. YA audiences and events always blow up my chat, and I live for it. Keep being you. So definitely do keep an eye on it though, because the Q&A is where we will be taking questions from. So if you have questions and you definitely want them to answer them, the Q&A is where you want to be. Keep connecting with each other in chat though. That is great. I will be Joy will be reading these later, so just know she'll see them even if she doesn't see them right the second. So, good stuff. Keep that in mind. And I think that is all of my business. So without further ado, Joy McCullough is a dear friend of the bookstore whose debut young adult novel, Blood, Water, Paint, won the Washington State and Pacific Northwest Book Awards, as well as a whole bunch of honors, including the National Book Award longlist, was a finalist for the ALA Morris Award, a Publishers Weekly flying start and had 4-star reviews. Also, it was about Artemisia Gentileschi, which sparks just so much joy for me. Her newest novel, We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire, is about a young girl who turns to the story of a 15th century French noblewoman whose name I am about to horrifyingly butcher, and I apologize in advance, but Marguerite de Bressieux? Close. Okay. Close enough. A legendary avenging knight for rape victims, as for inspiration and hope while navigating the trauma when her sister is raped. And in conversation with her tonight, we have Elana K. Arnold, author of the Prince Honor winner Damsel, which was so wonderful, the Book Award finalist What Girls Are Made Of, and book that I loved very much, Red Hood. Several of her books are Junior Library Guild selections and have appeared on many best books lists, including a catalog of feminist titles for young readers. And she is a teacher from Hamline University's MFA in Writing for Children and Young Adult program. So if you guys have questions, you know where to put them. Thank you guys both so much for being here. I am so excited to be a fly on the wall for this conversation. If you need anything, give me a shout. I will be invisible but listening, and that goes for all of you in the audience as well. I'll be watching the chat. So I'm gonna disappear, and I leave you in their capable hands.
Well, thank you. And Joy, thank you so much for inviting me to be in conversation with you and to help you celebrate. It's so wonderful to have community online, like you were saying. This is one of the silver linings, is that we can be here in person, even though we don't live in the same city. So first of all, congratulations. Congratulations on the release of your beautiful and important book. And yes, I hope you've had a chance to celebrate. How did you celebrate? That's not on our list of things we might talk about, but I'm very curious. How does one celebrate a book release in pandemic?
You know, it's strange in these times, but one of the things that we did, my family, on the weekend is we took the book because it's set in Seattle, and there's a bunch of spots where the characters go in Seattle. So we took the book and took pictures at all the different spots around Seattle. So that was fun.
Well, that's a great idea. That's handy. It was great. It was good planning then to write a book that was going to be released in the pandemic in a city you live in, so you could do that from home.
Yes, that made it
so wise thinking ahead of time.
Yes. And thank you so much for being here. I am such a huge fan. I'm sitting here at my writing desk, and I have a cross stitch that's a quote from Damsel that I would show, except it's kind of a spoiler for the book. And so if people haven't read it, you should read Damsel. But you are one of my very, very favorites. So I'm thrilled.
Thank you. Well, I should have made my kids come in here and listen to you. So, because they, Well, so let's start off. Why don't you tell us about We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire? What should we know about this beautiful book?
Yeah, so it is about M, who is a contemporary Seattle girl. And as you heard in the description, her sister gets raped at a frat party and then is badly failed by the justice system. And M, who had been all through the trial advocating on social media and in her school paper, is just completely devastated and disillusioned when this failure of justice happens. And she's angry. She's really angry. And while she's in the midst of this anger, she learns about Marguerite de Bressieux, which is my best pronunciation, though I don't speak French either, so not so sure. But Marguerite, who is this legendary avenger for rapists. And she sort of falls down this hole of research and starts writing her own book about Marguerite. So my book goes back and forth between M in the present day and all what her family is going through in this aftermath, and the book about Marguerite that she is writing.
Yeah, I love the structure of this book, which I'm excited to talk to you about, but I love things that weave. That's something I like to do in my work too. And I also love the forward moving story. The most obvious forward moving story is the one set in the past, whereas the story set in the present very much is dealing with events that have transpired before the book begins. So I'm very interested in structure, and I want to ask that in just a second. But first I want to ask, because I think we probably have writers in the audience too, is what came to you first with this book? What was your, where was your starting point?
So my starting point was a tweet. There is a Twitter account called Rejected Princesses, and they tweet about these sort of badass women from history that, you know, would never be in a Disney princess movie, but should. And so they tweeted about Marguerite, and they, you know, there was a thread of what they know, though there's not much to her story that's known. And I saw it and I thought, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. And then a few days later, they tweeted again to say, we're very sorry. The historian people have told us that this is not necessarily true. She may just be legendary. So she may not be real. And I saw that clarification and I thought, well, that's interesting. And I was interested in the question more than anything. Because I found it really equally compelling either way. If she was real, like that's obviously a really exciting story to tell. But if she wasn't real, that meant that she was created to be a legend at some point along the way, which means that there were people who needed that story and created it and passed it down and drew comfort or inspiration from it. And so I thought that was really interesting. So I knew I didn't want to write just a straight Marguerite story, because for one thing, I would have had to come down on a side. I would have had to, you know, decide what I thought was true. And I thought the question was what was most interesting. So I decided to have this framing of this contemporary girl who discovers her and grapples with the question. So the story of Marguerite came first, and then I sort of built M around her.
Oh, that's interesting. That was sort of my intuition because of your previous work, that you came to the work that way. But had that not been your previous work, I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have maybe thought that you started with your fictional character and then found the match. So what about M? How do you create a character to be a counterpart to a character as sort of epic, you know, as Marguerite? Someone who actually can use a sword, a physical one.
I think that what I knew instinctively was that she was very angry. And I wanted to write that. You write wonderful angry girls, and I love giving space to that on the page. And so yeah, I knew she was angry. At the time, one of the things that was happening was the Brett Kavanaugh hearings. And so that was making me angry. And so I think it was, you know, it wasn't a straight line from, you know, one place to another. It never is for me. But that was sort of what was feeding the creation of M and her family.
Yeah. I think I was working on revisions of Red Hood I think that's where I was in my writing when I was watching the Kavanaugh hearings.
And someone just said in the chat, I saw it pop up, Red Hood is brilliant, which it is.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. It's an angry book too. There's a lot of, anger makes people, it makes people really uncomfortable, especially when it's wielded by, by women, or by women identifying people in general. Yeah, like with cis women. I just read a wonderful book that had a lot of anger in it called Detransition Baby, about a series of three women in Brooklyn. One is a trans woman, one is a cisgendered woman, and one is a trans woman who has detransitioned. And it's very interesting to see which characters you feel sort of more awkward about when they like the character who is detransitioned, her relationship with her anger in her masculine identified body is respected more than her anger or her that was when she was in her female, markered body. So it's just very interesting to think about anger. Anyway, so the structure I think is fabulous of this book. And how do you balance that? How do you balance having two threads while not having your reader feel, because I never felt with your book like, oh no, don't leave this story, I don't want to hear about this, But then when I got the other one, I also likewise wasn't, in a hurry to get rid of that. I was always engaged with both stories. And how do you do that? Is that something that happens in drafting, or is that more of a revision question,
No.
that balance?
I
Do
think
you
that's
write one whole
definitely
story and then the other whole story and then weave them? How does
no.
that
So
work?
I didn't write them completely, but I also didn't write them back and forth as they appear now. So I was trying to remember because it's been like 3 years now, but I think that I'm almost positive I started with Marguerite, and oh, and I didn't say the Marguerite section is in verse, like Blood, Water, Paint was, and that basically means poetry. And I started with the Marguerite sections, but I think that I wrote a good section of that and then started to create M and her family and wrote some sections of that. But I find that in order to keep the voice sort of consistent, it's easier for me in first drafting anyway to only be working in one thing on like a given writing session, so I might have been writing an M chapter and then I'd get to a section where I know, oh, there should be a Marguerite section here, but I wouldn't switch over to writing that. I'd just write myself a note to, okay, Marguerite's going to happen here, and I'd probably go on to the next M section. But it was much more in revision where it started to thread, and that's like so much to my editor. Like that's definitely both of us working on that together, because that's a really tricky piece of it for sure.
Yeah, it really is. It feels like one of those balancing, and you feel like you need to balance it, and so you take a little bit from here and you put it over there, and where do you want the weight to be is sort of a revision question when it comes to multiple voices like that. Yeah. So yeah, you have these multiple perspectives, but then what about, so it sounds like you write the poetry on different days than you write the prose. And do you think those use different parts of your brain, being a poetry writer and being a prose writer? I mean, I also know that I'm interested because you're also a playwright.
Right.
So, and you also write books for younger readers. So which, I think writing picture books is a whole separate creature too. Probably more like poetry to me than it is like novel writing. So when you're working on a book that is going to have two, do you have days where you're a poet and so you work on the poetry sections, or does it not matter?
No, I don't think of it that way. I think that the creative process, the writing, the drafting is kind of the same for me, whether it's verse or prose or playwriting or whatnot. It's kind of all the same. It just is what I'm writing that day and the emotional truth of it, I guess, and so if it happens to be in verse, then I want to keep that voice, that kind of just my brain being in that gear of much more spare language, and versus usually a lot more honed in on the emotions. So it's sort of more for that reason. I guess maybe that's a little bit different part of my brain, but I don't think of it that way. I'm working on whatever I'm working on, but I sort of try and keep it contained to whatever it is for that day.
Do you have to do anything to sort of take care of yourself differently when you're writing about difficult subjects, or is it all copy, like Nora Ephron's mother said?
It's not. I mean, I definitely notice like increase in my anxiety when I'm working on something like this, which is part of why I really love also doing middle grade and picture books, so that I have that. And you do both too. Do you do things differently when you're working on your YA?
I know I don't either, but I probably should. I mean, there are some scenes where I know I'm going to write. Like I remember the one thing I remember particularly, there's a scene in What Girls Are Made Of where a dog is brought into the high kill shelter injured, and it's things don't go well for the dog, and things haven't gone well for the dog. And I knew I was going to write that scene, and my daughter had musical theater practice, so I had to wait for her, and I knew I was going to write that scene that night. And so I took myself out to a restaurant that I knew had a fireplace, right? And I sat as close as I could to the fireplace, and I got myself a really nice glass of red wine and a beautiful dinner, and I ate it while I was writing this sort of terrible scene. And so I think that was a moment of like choosing to take care of myself And I
That's
think the reason I
such
remember it
smart.
is because I don't usually. Yeah, I don't usually. So, but sometimes I do think that's a good technique though. So if you're going to do something terrible to yourself or your characters, maybe set it alongside taking some sort of extra care of yourself. Sometimes I write in the bath actually, for the same
Wow.
reason. Yeah. Yeah. I think taking care of my physical body while I'm doing things that are terrible in my mind, I think is something that I do sometimes. I don't know.
Oh, I'm learning
Yeah.
from you. I'll have to do
Yeah.
this.
You got to be careful with your computer though when you write in the bath.
Right, well, that makes me nervous.
Yeah,
I
but yeah,
put
I do switch. I do like to, and Mark says this, and I think you do this too naturally, is I don't want to only write that sort of really heavy stuff. And
Right.
so for me, middle grade especially is my respite from, and but not because it's lighter or easier, but because I think of them as like palate cleansers for one another, you know? Yeah. And I think writing the YA and the sort of the more intense stuff maybe helps my younger stuff from feeling too saccharine. I don't know, but I don't know. Do you write at the same time, both sorts of things, or how do you handle that in your work life?
I've been really lucky so far in that just the way like deadlines have worked out, I haven't needed to be first drafting two things at the same time.
Yeah.
So I haven't really had. I have been drafting a play that's sort of darker and heavier with a middle grade. And for that I will specify like chunks of time that morning is middle grade time and afternoon is working on the play, or weekdays are the middle grade and weekends are for working on the play, just to help my brain sort of compartmentalize it a little bit. Yeah, but generally I'm first drafting something and I'm revising or editing or copy editing something else, which helps a lot.
Yeah, different process, different parts of the process on different books. I did write What Girls Are Made Of and A Boy Called Bat at the same time, like the first draft of both. And I remember very much feeling like each one made the other more crisply what it was, because it was so different. But like you, many of the other books have not lined up just like that. So that was an interesting thing to do together. So as you write across all these different categories, I'm very curious about what stays the same for you as a writer. If you see any through lines in your sort of, yes, I like to use that word because I don't think it gets used enough. But now you've developed one, right? You've developed this body of work now, and it's interesting to look and say, what am I making, and how deliberate is that? And I'm curious.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can see more connections. Well, I can see a lot of connections between my plays and my YA. And then my middle grade a little bit, and then picture books are like you said, they're sort of a whole other thing, and they're so closely in collaboration with somebody else that they just sort of are a separate thing. So picture books aside, I don't know, they're all, my middle grades are of a similar, and my YAs are of a similar, but I feel like they're very, very different from each other. I mean, there's strong girls, whatever that means is going to be in everything I write. But otherwise, I don't know. I think maybe that's a better question for somebody who's like outside my work. Like, I think my agent's here. maybe he can answer. Because I don't know. It's hard for me. But in process, it's all the same. It's all storytelling. It's all just telling the stories that I needed to see in the world when I was younger, or he just said I'll weigh in later, that I want to be in the world for my kids and the other young people I know. So it's just all storytelling, and I'm sure there are through lines that like somebody analyzing them could find, but I'm not, so much of it is gut. Like, how do you compare A Boy Called Bat and What Girls Are Made Of? Like,
I think they're both very concerned with the way our interactions with animals make us more fully ourselves. I think that is something I have across all my work. I've thought a lot about it because I think my work too, my YA feels very different than my middle grade. But I do think that they're all concerned, most of my books are concerned with interrelationship between humans and animals in some way. And I think there's a lot, A Boy Called Bat doesn't have this, but all my other middle grade books have a question about fate or magic or God, which appears a lot in my YA too. Questions of who makes the rules and how much power do we have in relationship to the rules that exist in the universe. So, yeah, but I don't know. I mean,
well, just thinking about it now, there's certainly a through line about families and if not family, like what support somebody has or doesn't have. You know, Bloodwater Pain Artemisia is so isolated, and both of my middle grades have to do with characters who are figuring out how to you know, accept friendship and be in relationships with people, and certainly there's a lot of family in Ashes, so maybe that's a through line for me, but I hadn't ever consciously thought about that.
Yeah, because both the storylines in We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire are pairings. There's, you know, you have these sister relationships, and another support character in sort of forming a triad of support, and which is different than your first book, which, like you said, is more solitary. And that's something I've seen too. Like in my books, I realized after I finished and Red Hood was done, I realized it was the first YA book I've ever written that doesn't end literally with a girl physically stepping or flying into her future alone. Like everything, and I'd written 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 books that had the exact same ending, basically. A girl alone stepping into a future. And then I wrote Red Hood, and it wasn't about, the ending was different. She has a community.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know that the difference is that I have developed one for the first time in my life, you know, but I didn't intend to write this different ending. I didn't even know I'd written the same ending. So I don't know, maybe this is a question for later. I probably should have given it to you earlier, but like, I'm wondering how your physical life outside of your work may have impacted, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. The difference in that sort of choice that you made to have, you know, I mean, you get fewer choices because of historical characters, but you still, you were drawn to the story of this person who was so isolated. And then you were drawn to the story with not only one sort of triad of care, and different kinds. There's also the family sort of has this shape, and then the friendship, and then the back, you know, the story in verse also has that shape of support. So I'm just wondering what changed for you.
That's so interesting. So I discovered Artemisia I was only a couple years out of college. I had just married, but we were just moving to Seattle alone, the two of us just sort of striking out. And I was trying to get into the theater community, but I didn't have much support system at all, and had struggled for a long time to find any kind of theater community, until Bloodwater Paint was produced in 2015, because it was a play before a book. And that community, which this was for a different production of it, but that's a poster for it, and that theater community, and I wouldn't have written the book without that production. And I assume Amy Poisson, my collaborator, is out there. I wouldn't have written the book without all of those other artists seeing the value in this story and encouraging me. You know, and then from that, I have built such an amazing kidlit community. So that may be part of Ashes having more support.
And Ashes has a story that is told not singularly. There's an artist who's part of the story in an important way, who illustrates the poetry that M is writing. I don't know. I just think that's really interesting, the things that we are experiencing. Yes. Oh my gosh, I love the art.
Yes.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
And this one is cool. I'll just say, if anybody doesn't know, so the artist's name is Maya Kobabe, and Maya did, most of them are illuminations at the beginning of chapters that look like, I'm trying to find one, like in old illuminated manuscripts. So yeah, like that at the very beginning of the first letter. And Maya did just amazing work. But that dragon that I showed you, here it is. My daughter Cordelia, Maya gave us permission for this and gave us a file of the line art, and then my daughter Cordelia did the color.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And so all of the copies bought from Third Place will have this with it. So that was just a really cool thing to be able to involve my teenage daughter in this.
Yeah. Do your kids read your books?
The middle grade. They've read my middle grade and picture books. But no, my daughter is turning 15 tomorrow. She hasn't been interested in blood water paint yet, and my 10-year-old son is too young.
Yeah.
So when they want to, if they're ready, but yeah. Do your kids?
Oh, my kids they're not really interested in my books, which is, I keep trying to get rid of. I used to pay them 50 cents a chapter to listen to me read the middle grade books to them and tell me what I was doing wrong. If you tell them, listen and tell them what I'm doing wrong, that's a good way to get your kids to listen. And they pointed out a couple of things. Kids would never say that, Mom. So they have listened to me read to them a draft of most of my younger books, but they could read anything they wanted, but they haven't really, been drawn to it. So
now mine are going to be like, you should be paying us.
Although my kids do like to tell my daughter likes to tell her friends about the the most sordid parts of my books. So yeah, I remember once I was waiting for my daughter outside of a rehearsal, and this little girl Emma came up. She was like 11, and she goes, "I'm reading one of your books, Mrs. Arnold." I'm like, "Oh, great! Which one?" I'm like, "Infandus" had just come out. I'm like, "Please not Infandus, please not Infandus." And she goes, "Infandus?" And her mom's right there all proud. And I'm like, "I think that's wonderful." And I said, and a book is a great place to practice being uncomfortable, and it's a great place to practice saying no. So if you get to a point where you feel you don't want to keep reading, you get to put the book down, and that's your choice. And I said to mom, you might want to read it too and have a conversation. But that was the end of that conversation. But a few months later, she told me she read it and she loved it. So I mean, there you go. So yeah, kids find the book. But I love to tell kids that, like, and just people in general, like, it's such a great place to practice consent, a book, you don't feel safe. What a wonderful intuition. Maybe you should leave, I wish I would have known those options existed to me when I was younger. Probably would have saved me a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I think that's really wonderful. We have a very open reading policy here, and my kids read whatever they want, but I do think kids have that ability to say, "Oh, this is not, I'm not ready for this. This is not right for me," and put it down. If we give them the freedom to do that.
And as I mean, so it's interesting when people like tell people they have to read our books. Like, that never happens to me with YA. My books don't get, as far as I know, assigned. But I did get an email.
Assigned Damsel to people.
Wonderful.
Tell people you must read Damsel.
Well, right. Personal assignation aside. Yeah, no classrooms. But I did have a company write to me and said that they were doing something about a boy called Bat, and would I write a quiz for them? And they wanted to, like, give this book to like 500 kids if I would write a reading quiz. And I was like, I'm against that completely. There's no way. So I thought about it, and I finally wrote back. I'm like, I will do a reading quiz if every answer can be correct. Then I will write it, and they wrote back and said, no, thank you. So
oh man, I love that.
That was a really creative, solve. But no, I want to ask you just two more questions, and then I want to let other people ask questions, because I already see there are some, but I just want to know these answers myself. So the first one is, actually I have a couple. So this is a quick one. Did you make a conscious decision not to separate your books in different categories with different names, or did it just sort of happen? Because like you said, you write, you have this New York Times best-selling picture book, right? Congratulations. And then you have these incredible sort of risky, not risque at all, but risky books that you write in the YA sphere. So tell us about that.
Yeah, and I'm interested to hear your answer to that too, because part of it was simply that there are so many authors I really admire, like you, who have picture book through risky YA, and even some adult, Shannon Hale and Jacqueline Woodson, Martha Brockenbrough, who we mentioned, have these broad careers with their names on all those books. And so to me, it was never really a question. They're all my work. And to me, it would have felt strange to have some books with my name on them and some books with a pseudonym. It might have felt sort of like, well, these are my books and these are somehow other. And I don't think it's necessarily that for people who use a pseudonym. That's just sort of how I think it would feel to me. I don't sit down when I'm writing a middle grade and say, okay, I'm writing middle grade. I'm just storytelling, and it happens to be for 10-year-olds instead of 17-year-olds. So it always, it was never a question for me. How about you?
Well, I waited so long and I wanted so badly to see my name on a book that there was no way I wasn't gonna have my name on a book. But I did consider briefly when I had Infandus come out within like a month, and that was my most sort of experimental YA to date. Come out as, within a month of my first middle grade novel. I think they came out at the same time. So I asked my middle grade editor, Ada Nucci at HMH at the time, what she thought. And I said, because my other name is Elana Kuczynski, that's my name just as much. So I was like, I could publish those. And she said, I don't really see a reason why. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't really either. So, but I've been glad since, because I do feel like that my work is my work. And I do want people to be able to find, not have to hunt for, if they want to find more of it. So, but that's interesting. And then my other question is, can you tell us a little bit more about your work as a playwright? And I'm curious about how your work as a playwright impacts your work as a fiction writer. I mean, most clearly, in this case, you had a play that you translated into, you made into a book. So that's, right. But in general, do you think being a playwright brings with it, or studying playwriting brings with it, skills that the rest of us should get better at?
Oh, well, I don't know if I'd put it that way. But yeah, so I studied theater in college, and I focused in on playwriting when I had this really amazing playwriting professor who sort of made me realize that this was my creative avenue of expressing myself in writing. And I worked at playwriting for a very long time, to very minimal success before deciding to try fiction. And I had to work at a long time at the fiction too. I wrote 10 books before Blood, Water, Paint. But wow. I do think that in addition to just basic sort of understanding of story and character arcs and dialogue, obviously, like, I'm good at dialogue because playwriting obviously gives you that. I think there's a sense of theatricality that is in my work that doesn't necessarily need to be in everyone's work, but in mine, I have people ask me about Blood, Water, Paint a lot in the book, how Judith and Susanna interact with Artemisia. They're part of her paintings, and then they're just there talking to her, and people asking me about how I did that. Well, I did that because it was a play first, and on the stage it's not, there's not a hurdle for the audience when the painting character starts talking to the painter, because it's a theatrical moment. It makes sense in the theater. And so I just did it on the page. I didn't know it would work, but I just did it and took that leap. And when it did work, I think that gave me sort of encouragement of, oh, I can try these things that are maybe more theatrical and try them in books. So I think that sense of being willing to try sort of non-conventional storytelling might come from the theater background.
That's interesting. One thing I noticed, collaborative
nature of theater. I love that so much, and a lot of people go into making a book, but creatively you're often sort of, you're creating the whole world. You don't have designers, and directors and actors helping build the creative part of it. But it makes it so that I'm not at all precious about edits and whatnot. People have input. I'm like, bring it. I would like more collaboration, please.
I love that too. Yeah. It's it's such a gift if someone else loves your book, your story as much as you do, and wants it to be its best and most truest self. It is such a gift when you find someone like that who wants to champion. So the other thing I see though in your work that I feel is very staged, you're very aware of where all your characters' bodies are. I'm never lost. I was like, wait, who said that? And I think that leads to perspective and point of view, because as a playwright, it seems like you have a very sort of, godlike perspective that I think allows you, when you write a book, though, kind of to know that you're doing something different, and your ability to get into characters' minds. I don't know. I just felt very clear about the set and who was where and who was moving how in your writing, which I admire. I notice a lot of writers have a hard time with that, with the physicality of
I rely very heavily on directors. Hello, Amy, in my plays. So it's good to know that I can pull it off okay in the novel.
Yeah. Well, I could ask you questions all day, but there are good questions, I'm sure, in the Q&A. I know the first one was good. I saw it. I clicked on it just to see before we started, and I was excited by it. But so why don't we spend time with the questions from the audience, because I want to give them a chance to ask their questions too.
Okay.
Well, hello.
Welcome back.
Let's start with a question from Sandra. It says, do you find it hard to celebrate and express joy with books that are such tough subjects? Do you feel like you miss out on a lot of confetti and balloons?
Oh, that's such an interesting question. I did not feel that way with Blood, Water, Paint at all. And I think that was because it had been such a long journey that there was no way I wasn't celebrating with all the confetti and all the balloons when that book finally came out. And also I had already, because it had been a play first, I had gone through the really heart-wrenching part when the play was produced. And not that writing the book was easy, but when it came out, I was much more ready to sort of give it to the world and have my confetti and balloons time. And then I don't have a lot to compare it to because my middle grade came out in April of 2020. So there really wasn't any celebrating there. I don't know if that would have been more joyful. It just kind of didn't have a chance. It's here, if anyone wants a happier book. But yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think so. I think that it's all thrill of the fact that my books get to be out there and find readers, whether they are happier books or sadder books. I don't know, Elana, do you have an answer to that?
I think I have it. Yeah, I definitely feel, we actually talked a little about this before the audience came on, is like, it's hard to say like, I hope you enjoy my book to a reader when you're, you know, that you're handing them a book that isn't joyful, you know, that isn't something that they probably are going to enjoy. It's not a beach read, you know. I saw in Fandus once, And What Girls Are Made Of shelved as chicklet.
Oh no,
I have nothing, but it was just like, that's, you're gonna, first of all, you're giving it to the wrong reader's gonna pick it up, they're gonna be upset, you know. But I do sometimes feel with my work that I don't know, that I hope that it finds its readers and that it doesn't hurt people, you know. I don't want my work to hurt people, and it hurts me, so I imagine it might. So yeah, I do feel like it's harder for me to celebrate the stuff that came from a place of such pain. It's very hard to think about that as being something. It's hard for me to get that sort of like feeling of yeah, I'm glad it's out there. Mostly I feel relief.
Yeah.
Actually, whenever any book comes out, I feel relief. Like, I don't have to carry this anymore. Now it's in the world. So I don't know, but that's kind of a bummer. An answer.
But it's honest.
Yeah. So, but it is more fun to celebrate the things I know I'm not going to read terrible like opinions about me on Goodreads later about, you know, which one should go on Goodreads, don't go on Goodreads, but it is a little bit, yeah. It's like, it's almost like I'm giving someone the sword handle first, you know,
right,
when I give them a book sometimes, you know, and then I'm like, here you go. That doesn't feel so.
Yeah. oh, that's very visual. So Elana has a question. YA seems like a notoriously hard genre for new writers to enter into. Is there any advice for writers who want to write stories for younger readers?
Okay. Well, like I said, I had a very long journey. I wrote 10 manuscripts before my debut novel got published, and I wrote 5 before I got my first agent. So it was a long road. And I have 2 pieces of advice I give. One is to find your community. I am so fortunate to have an incredible community of writing friends and finding people who are at the same stage you are. So if you're querying, finding other querying writers, and if you're having your debut published, find those people. And then we all have journeys at different paces. So just because you start with a group of querying writers doesn't mean you're all going to advance at the same time, but it just helps to have people who know the road you're on, and you can share joys and you can share frustrations and you can share, all of it. And not to mention have critique partners who can make your work better, all of that. So having such a fantastic writing community has been huge for me, especially in that stage when I was trying to get to the agent and then the book deal. The other piece of advice I have is to always start writing the next thing once you've gotten something out into the world. So, and that might mean you've started querying something, start writing something else. And that's for, there's for a couple of reasons. One is that the thing you've put out in the world might not sell or might not get you the agent. That was the case for me for 9 books. And so by the time I would finish querying something, sort of come to the end of the list of agents, I would have a new book that was ready to go. And so that would help me keep moving. But the other thing was that I would get excited about the new thing. Most of the time, I would get to the point where I was like, "Ooh, I hope I don't get an offer on that one because this one's so much better," you know. And so it's really helpful. And then now, as a published author, it's really nice. I'm so thrilled as this book is coming out. I'm already well underway of edits with a new YA. And so like I love that this is out and I can be talking about it, but also I don't want to be going on Goodreads or thinking about, response to it. And so it helps to be able to just put my brain into the new thing I'm excited about. So those are my 2 pieces of advice, finding your community and learning to move on to the next thing and get excited about it. How about you, Elana?
Those are great pieces of advice. I didn't find a community until, I don't know, a couple of years ago, really. Like that's has never been in my real wheelhouse. It would have been a nice thing to have built sooner. Yeah, I'm sitting like, oh, I wish I could go back to me in 2010 or 2008 and tell myself those things. But I think the idea that something is easier or harder to sell is probably not a great place from which to create art. Mm-hmm. And if you want to write something, you have to write, it has to be art, then craft, then business. Not only because that's how the best art gets made, but also because that's how the most saleable products get made, are the ones that begin with art. So honestly, it's all incredibly hard to sell. I get rejections still. I get rejections. I've had like 3 picture books that I think are brilliant. I can't believe nobody's bought these picture books. I cannot believe no one has bought these picture books, and yet they have not sold, even though I have picture books out and all the other things out, and it's all hard. So you might as well write the thing that you absolutely love because you love it, because there is literally no guarantee that any of it will ever sell. As depressing as that is, it's also really freeing. Yeah. Art first.
I love that. Art, then craft, then business. I'm gonna have to cross-stitch that.
Yeah.
So I'm seeing a couple of questions about process here. Let's start with Catherine is wondering whether your process for writing this sort of book changed since Blood, Water, Paint. Is it similar or different?
Oh, what a great question.
Well, the process was very different for a number of reasons, but I'd already written, I was adapting a play. So when I wrote the novel of Blood, Water, Paint, I had the characters and the story, it was all there for me. That isn't to say it was easy or straightforward, but I was a whole bunch of steps along in the process when I started writing Blood, Water, Paint as a novel. So there was that. And then there was the fact that Blood, Water, Paint got a lot of attention and acclaim, which is amazing, and I'm incredibly grateful. And it also puts tremendous pressure on the next book. So that was a new thing, and I'm sure it impacted my process, though I'm not sure how to articulate it. And it was different in that we had sold, Blood, Water, Paint as a complete manuscript to my editor, whereas we sold this one as we started talking about it at the concept idea, and then we sold it with like 50 pages or something. And so my editor was involved from much earlier on. So yeah, there were a lot of changes that had to do just with circumstance. But if I were to set all those things aside, again, I think it's just, my writing process stays the same. It's more the sort of outside circumstances that are affecting how I feel about my writing process. If that makes sense. Does that make sense?
It does to me, yeah. What's interesting to me is like, we haven't talked, everyone always wants to know if you're a plotter or a pantser, which I always think is a funny question. But it sounds like you were by nature a plotter with blood, not water, paint, since you had something you were adapting. You knew exactly the main events, you knew what was going to happen. But what about with this book? Did you know what the ending was going to be? Did you know where you were going when you started out, or close to that, or was it more exploratory?
Yeah, I'm kind of hybrid where I don't plot the whole thing, but I also don't completely just sit down and wing it. I'll plot like about 50 pages worth. And then I'll write that. And then I know more about the characters and I know more about where they're headed. And I'll sort of plot out the next 50 or so and write that. And that's how I make my way through. So
has that been true over all 10? Because you said you wrote a number of books, but these aren't the only two, right? They're the only two that are published right now. But so has that always been the way that you've approached your work, do you think, basically?
Yeah, pretty much. It's what I do with my middle grade as well. And the second middle grade is coming out next month.
Yay!
But yeah, that's pretty much just how I do it. I do a bunch of like pre-writing character stuff before I start, and that's true whether it's middle grade YA or plays. So yeah.
Interesting. All right, what's next?
Plotter and pantser?
Oh, mostly I don't know where I'm going. Damsel is the only book I ever wrote where I knew the ending before I started.
Oh,
I knew exactly where I was going with that book. Yeah, and it was a thrill to know the ending for a change. It was fun. But yeah, normally I don't know what I'm doing. Often, sometimes until like the third or fourth draft, I'm like, okay, now what's the plot of this thing? But I find the story usually in revision more than even in the first draft. Yeah.
All right. So let's see. Laura has a few questions, and one of them we've kind of already answered. But let's see. What made you choose to write your first novel in verse rather than prose?
Well, I think that I had been writing all these books, and none of them had been in verse prior to Blood, Water, Paint. Everything was prose except for one that had some short verse sections. But when I started to think, oh, Blood, Water, Paint could be a YA novel. She's 17 for most of the events of the play, and so I started to see that could work. I immediately knew it was going to be verse, partly because verse is really good for stripping everything away except the emotion. And there's so much really raw emotion. And it's also really good for events that are violent or traumatic in some way, because you can get the reader there with a few words rather than going into a complete description of what it is to decapitate someone, which happens in Blood, Water, Paint. And so, and that's both for me as the writer and for the reader. There are a lot of things happen in Blood, Water, Paint, and then again in Ashes that would be very difficult to both write and read, like emotionally difficult. And I think it could really alienate the reader a lot. Whereas if you can strip those things away and have it be about sort of the beating heart, which I think verse just allows beautifully, it's easy, it's more accessible for somebody to come along on that journey. So yeah, that, and then also the fact that I was adapting it from a play, and I think there's a lot of crossover with the spareness of language and the white space on the page, correlating with what is not said on stage is equally and sometimes more important than what is being said between characters. There's a lot of crossover there that just instinctively made sense to me. Yeah, so that was why on Blood, Water, Paint. And then with Ashes, I knew that Marguerite's sections would be verse, for much the same reason. Though what I didn't think about was the fact that verse is great for emotion. It's not so great for physical action. And this is literally a quest story. And there's sword fighting and battle scenes. And my editor and I figured that out, that verse is not the best vehicle for that. And we had to work on that. So helpful hint if you're trying to write a quest story, maybe not verse.
Second person works really well, actually, for that though.
Okay.
For action scenes.
But
That is beautifully put. So Laura's third question is, what are some of your favorite angry girls in literature / art?
oh my goodness. Well, okay. I knew I'd get asked about books, and I have this tendency to blank, so I brought some that I set out. So Winterkeep, which is the fourth in the Graceling Realm book, but you can read it on its own. And Kristen Cashore, and not only Winterkeep, actually all the Graceling Realm books, she writes the most amazing, complex, and angry girls. And there's a wonderful new character named Lavisa in this book, she comes from this really difficult family with abusive parents, and she has an amazing, I see Andrew's comment calling out all of the wonderful angry girls in Winterkeep. She just has a wonderful, amazing journey. So I'm just calling this one out. And then everything that Elana ever writes, basically. And what else? Who would you throw in there, Elana?
I wasn't prepped, but I think The Lost Girl by Anne Ursu is a middle grade with a very unhappy, angry middle school aged girl. That's the first one that comes to my mind. Yeah.
Yes, and I also have A Wish in the Dark here, which is a Les Mis retelling. And there is a girl, it's middle grade. So there is a 12-year-old, I think she's 12-year-old girl, who she's the Javert character. And I remember when I started reading thinking, how do you write a middle grade Les Mis? But if you're not familiar with Les Mis, I remember we were talking earlier and you were saying how you weren't that into musicals. Javert's whole thing is vengeance. And justice, and there is nothing hopeful to him, and I didn't know how she was going to create a character she's very angry and she's out for justice, and then she has this amazing arc. So, and it just got a Newbery honor.
It did. Yeah. Another one, I'd say Pet by Kweke Emezi. The main character, Jam, isn't that angry on the surface, but she summons a creature, an avenging angel / monster, which I see as, herself, a piece of herself. So I think, that is, maybe fits too. That's a great book.
Yeah. And I see they're putting links to all of the books in the chat. So
plus Pet is just like, that's one of those, I read that and I was like, how did I not come up with that name? That made me so upset. There's a short story I read in graduate school called Pet Milk. And I read that and I remember wishing that's a short story I remember wishing I had written too. So I don't know what it is about pet, but pet milk, pet, anyway.
And you write about pets.
I do write about pets, yeah.
Yeah, all of those books. So good. I linked them all. Go check them out. That is your homework.
Yeah.
So let's see. What is our next question? So, here we go. Gabrielle wants to know, what are you guys working on now? How many book ideas do you generally have on your back burner at any given time?
So my poor agent, I have so many, and I have 3 books come out this year, and I have 4 books coming out next year.
Wow.
Thank you, Jim, and I'm sorry. But yeah, like I mentioned, I am working on the next YA, which isn't announced and doesn't have a season, but it follows similar themes, although it's not focused on assault this time, finally. And I'm working on a middle grade that's for summer 22 that is so much fun. It's that palate cleanser relief that is about a girl at her mom's theater company who does not want to be on stage, and she gets up to backstage hijinks, and it's just fun. It's just pure fun, and it was so much fun to write during this pandemic. So yeah, those are the things I'm sort of most actively on right now. How about you, Elana?
I have a book coming out next month too. It's called The House That Wasn't There. It's a middle grade novel that I absolutely love. Look at see the house that wasn't there. That is, oh my gosh, I love that so much. I love this.
A starred review for it, didn't you?
Yes. I love this book. I'm very excited about it. Middle grade. And then I'm working on getting into the next draft of my next young adult novel, which is called The Blood Years. And it is a fictional account of my grandmother's endurance of the Holocaust in Chernovitz, Romania. And I have a book that I'm working on that hasn't been announced yet. It's going to be a bat length series. You know, the books are about that long, about 25,000 words each, about a girl who goes to live on an island for the summer called Marble Island. And then I'm working on a revision of what I hope will be my first adult novel called Little Bear. So yeah, so a bunch of different things. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you're writing adult too.
It's hard. It's only hard because well, it's probably my most autobiographical novel. You know how they say like, oh, your first novel's always like basically a thinly disguised autobiography. Apparently I managed to hold it off until now, but this is a very so it's set in the 80s and 90s. And it's so I don't know if it's a novel, maybe it's just a memoir and I should just stop trying to make it into a novel. I don't know. But yeah, thank you for Jenny who says she loves the cover. I love it too. I think it's just so charming and smart, the way the artist did that. So.
Oh, that's so exciting. And you saying memoir made me think this is adult, but on the Angry Girls books, Things We Didn't Talk About When I Was a Girl by Jeannie Vanasco, I believe it is a memoir. And it is really fascinating. A woman who decides to go back and talk to the boy who raped her in high school.
I heard about that. I haven't read that. Yeah.
It's obviously really, really difficult. But it's really incredibly examines the form of what memoir even is, and sort of interrogates that while telling the story. It's fascinating.
Can you say the title again? Things We Didn't Talk About When I Was a Girl?
When I Was a Girl.
Okay. And I just read this wonderful memoir too. I just read Educated. Probably everyone's already ahead of me on this one. But I just read it and it's quite fabulous. I recommend it's in the memoir. So awesome.
All right, so we're about at the end of our time here. Let's just do one more question because there are so many here that we didn't get to. But Sharon wants to know if there's any chance you might revisit any of those 10 manuscripts, or do you have too many new ideas? And also adds that she's biased as she read and loved a couple of those earlier manuscripts.
Yes, that's a critique partner asking, but I get asked this a fair bit, and mostly the answer is no. Mostly because I just have so many new ideas that are about where I'm at right now. And so I'm mostly leaving them behind, with the exception of one, which I didn't mention in the what I'm working on, but I actually am working on. I'm taking one of those and I'm adapting it into a graphic novel.
Wow.
I'm working with an illustrator friend, and it's not sold or anything. It may not become a thing, but it's been really fun to revisit this story and envision it in a new way. And writing a graphic novel feels similar to a play because I'm writing dialogue and describing some of the action. And otherwise it's up to a collaborator. So I don't know if it'll become a thing, but that is one that I'm revisiting. And Sharon, I'll tell you which one it is offline.
I love that because your last book was a play and then you turned it into a novel, and now you're taking a novel and you're turning it into a script of sorts. So yeah, that's interesting. Nothing is wasted is the thing. Like,
right.
Yeah, it all matters. Even the stuff that you don't ever see in print is still it leads to the next open door.
Absolutely. And not only in I learned so much just as a writer along the way with each book, but also it all really happened in the right time. I'm so glad I debuted with the book I did, with the editor and the agent that I did. Like it was so hard. And I see names, I know there are some people out there who've had this incredibly long journey too and are still on it. And it was so hard in the time, but it turned out the way it was supposed to. So I'm hoping that for all of you as well.
Well, thank you so much for having this conversation and for inviting me to be part of it. I'm so excited for you, and I hope that everybody who hasn't yet had a chance, which probably is most of you since it just came out, will pick up your copy of We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire. It is beautiful. In fact, I got to say beautiful things about it.
Yes.
What is art if not a sword? With We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire, Joy McCullough wields and strikes her sharp-edged, finely honed blade, a fierce beauty, just like its author. So thank you so much for allowing me the honor of reading your work and chatting with you tonight.
Thank you so much for that amazing blurb and for being here and for writing some of my very favorite books and being a general inspiration. I'm so thrilled.
Well, thank you. And thank you for hosting us too.
Yeah,
Oh, hey, absolutely. My pleasure. You guys kind of took the words right out of my mouth here. Thank you, audience members, all of you for being here. Thank you guys both for being here. This was such a great conversation. These conversations about angry girls are exciting and important, and especially good when they're a little uncomfortable. So thank you so much for sharing with us all of these great discussions. Thank you guys for all of the questions. Go ahead and follow the links that are in the chat. Come in, buy books. Let us know when you're in the bookstore if you were here. We love to hear that kind of input. And I think this is where we say goodnight. So again, one more big thank you, and we'll see you all next time.
thank you. Good night.